Hi everyone, welcome back to the Stitches and Scribbles channel. My name is Erin and I have a reading podcast for you guys today. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in December, although it's not very many, so that part should go pretty fast, and also just talking a little bit about what my goals are for reading in 2026. Let's start with books I read. So the first book that I finished in December of 2025 was A Christmas Carol. This is my copy that sits on my shelf. I try to reread A Christmas Carol every year. It's one of my very favorite books and it's pretty short. This copy doesn't look short, but this is a fairly large print edition. So it's a lot longer than it looks. This is the copy that I usually put out on display somewhere in my house during the holiday season. I didn't get to this year, but I pulled it off my shelf just to show you. I actually listened to this book as an audiobook this year, but I did it with a fairly different format. So there's a podcast version of A Christmas Carol produced by the Merry Beggars, which is, I believe, a company from Relevant Radio. I think that's the parent company. But they did an audio drama production of A Christmas Carol. So it's a full cast, sound effects, all of that. And they originally released it so that it was an advent calendar. You could listen to one little section each day leading up to Christmas. I did not do it quite as an advent calendar. I did listen to more than one episode at a time, but I listened to that while I was still working in the first part of the month. Before we went on break, and I found that it was a really engaging read for while I was doing my librarian tasks at work. So it was, because I was so familiar with the book, I could listen to it while shelving, but I thought that production was really, really fantastic. So in my reading app, I logged it as a different edition of A Christmas Carol that I have the audiobook for. It's the Hugh Grant narrated version, which I also highly recommend that version as well. But since there was no listing for it in Storygraph, I just logged it as a different edition of the audiobook. I highly recommend having a book that you go back to during the holiday season, whether it's something Christmas related or not. I find that it's just a really cozy way to kind of get into the Advent spirit, and I love A Christmas Carol for that because it is so short and it's very easy to plan every year to reread the book and watch a movie version of it. Our favorite happens to be the Muppet Christmas Carol version, but I really like that kind of little Advent ritual that I have for myself, so I was glad I was able to continue it this year. The second book I read, I also kept at work just for some downtime in between things. This is The Science of Middle Earth, and it is edited by Roland Lehoux, and it's a compilation of essays about theoretical science within Middle Earth. So it has everything from like the economic value of jewels and gold in the Tolkien universe to like the zoology of the Oliphants. So it's a really wide range of topics and purely just for fun. And one of the things I found really interesting about this book is that most of the essays are actually translated. A lot of them are from French organizations and universities and translated to English. But this was a great book to kind of stop and start throughout the month because the essays are all pretty short, and since they're all individual topics, I didn't have to keep track of a running storyline while reading this. So I ended up actually covering quite a few classes during the month of December for teachers who had to leave for meetings or for various things. And frequently I was there during a test or a study hall period to cover. So I brought this with me, and it was a great conversation starter with some students as well, because I did have a couple kids ask like, well, how can you have a book that's the science of Middle Earth? Middle Earth is not real. So I explained how books like this work, and I actually have several other books similar to this. I have, at the very least, I know I have the Physics of Christmas and The Science of Harry Potter, I believe, is actually on my shelf behind me. And I know at one point I had both the physics of Star Trek and the physics of Star Wars, but I don't know if I have either of those anymore. But I really enjoy books like this because they do kind of introduce science topics in a way that's very approachable and fun. This was probably the heaviest of the books like that I have read and the most challenging to read, but it was still very fun and very interesting. The next book that I read was Once Upon a December by Amy E. Reichert. I actually listened to this as an audiobook as well, but I had already purchased the physical copy. And my mom and I have actually both been enjoying Amy Reichert's books a lot lately. There's still one left that she currently has my copy of it, and I haven't read it yet. It's the Kindred Spirits Supper Club is the one that I haven't read yet. But Once Upon a December was a really, like, soft fantasy is what I would describe it as. Romance book that takes place in a magical Christmas market. So the main premise of the book is that Astra is the main character, and she has gone through a really messy divorce. Her ex-husband is absolutely horrible. And she meets Jack Clausen, who works at a holiday market, and there's just something a little bit special about the holiday market, and that it keeps bringing the two of them together. One of the things I really liked in this book is that there's these little trolls, or Nisa, that keep appearing throughout the story in the form of little wood carvings. And I love Amy Reichert's books because they all take place in the Milwaukee area, which is where I live. And she does such a fantastic job of putting in such small details that really, if you're from the area, it makes you feel like you're there. It's a very good grounding element to the stories. Even something as small as like the restaurants that she mentions the main character and her friend going to, or even like locations downtown of where she's looking for this magical Christmas market. But this one, I still don't think it was my favorite of her books. I think I liked The Simplicity of Cider and The Optimist's Guide to Letting Go better, but this one was still very good, and I would say rereadable during the holiday season. I could see myself not listening to this every year like I do with The Christmas Carol, but coming back to it every so often and re-listening to it. This one, I ended up getting the audiobook version of it because I wanted my mom and I to both be able to read it during the month of December. So even though I bought this as like a shelf trophy, I did get the audiobook as well through my Audible account. And I really liked the Audible version as well. The narrator was really great for this story. But highly recommend this one if you're looking for a lighthearted holiday read. The last book I read was actually recommended to me by a student. I had one of my upper elementary school girls come up to me a couple days before break, and she was like, "Mrs. my last name, have you read this book?" And she like holds it up and puts it in my face. And I looked at the cover, and it was The Christmas Pig by J.K. Rowling. So I said, "No, I haven't read that book. Is it good?" And she was like, "You have to read it. Like right now, you have to read it." This is another time where I was covering in her classroom just for the morning, or like for an hour in the morning, and they were working on a project that the kids could just go and work on it. So actually, while I was sitting there, I downloaded the Audible version of it. So I don't have the physical copy to show you, but I can show you my Storygraph page for it. It was The Christmas Pig by J.K. Rowling. So I was able to tell the student that I had downloaded it while we were sitting there. She was very excited. I'm sure she's going to ask me about it when we get back to school immediately. But I thought that this was an adorable story. It is in no way related to the Harry Potter universe. It's an entirely separate story, but it captures some of the like really specific world building elements that are so beloved in the Harry Potter series. And it follows a young boy named Jack who has a very beloved pig that he calls DP, and he gets in an argument with his stepsister, and the pig is tossed out of the car window, never to be found again. And in an attempt for an apology, his stepsister and his grandfather get him a new pig, and it's just not the same. Jack has a complete meltdown. He's horrified. His original pig has been with him since he was a very tiny baby. And that night, since this takes place on Christmas Eve, the new pig, as well as all of the other items in Jack's room, come to life. And the new pig, which he calls the Christmas pig, leads him into the land of the lost to try to find DP. And it's a really sweet story that kind of reminds me of things like the Nutcracker or Alice in Wonderland, of like going into another place to search for something on some grand adventure. And also includes a lot of really sentimental details about what it is to lose something, what it is to have truly loved something, and also is a really good message about dealing with lost items for children, which is something that doesn't get talked about very often. I feel like you would expect a book like this to have a very happy ending of they find the pig, and that's not quite what happens. So I really liked this book for the emotional quality of it. I think reading it as an adult, it makes you feel very sentimental about things that have been important to you at some point in the past that you maybe no longer have. It definitely strikes a chord with anyone who's lost a beloved toy from when they were a child. But it had just the right level of like Christmas magic with like very detailed and unique world building to it. So I really enjoyed this book, actually. This is another one I started listening to just before we went on break while I was doing some shelving at school, and then finished it very quickly once break did start and I was doing kind of my holiday tasks. And then that's it for this year. For all of 2025, I read 101 books, which my goal was 75, so 101 was pretty good. I am probably going to keep my goal about the same for next year. And I definitely slowed down in the second half of the year in terms of reading, just because life got a little busier. But I still made it to 100 books, so clearly I didn't slow down too much. But I think being a librarian helps with that. There is a certain amount of reading that I can do during the workday, especially since I do count children's chapter books towards my reading goal. I don't count picture books because then the number would be far, far higher, because I read probably close to 10 picture books a week, if not more. Some of those being the ones I read aloud with my class, or new ones coming in, or books that I just see on the shelf and I'm checking what they're about so that I can sort them into different collections and things like that. But I did want to take a few minutes to talk about my reading goals for 2026. And this was something that I thought about a lot. There's been kind of a discourse on social media, in particular, I've seen it a lot on TikTok, about are we spreading overconsumption of books into, or are we spreading the overconsumption lifestyle into our reading? Like, do we really need to be trying to read 100 books a year? Why are we putting so much pressure on ourselves? Why are people purchasing books in such high volume just to put on a shelf or just to show that they've read them? And I do think that that's an important conversation to be having, because there is, like, books are expensive right now. And I know that I have always tried to only purchase books that I know I will reread, or if I'm purchasing a book that I've never read before from an author that I already know that I like. I very rarely buy a brand new book with no experience with either the author or the story itself. And I would say the exception to that is if I'm visiting like a small local bookstore when we're on vacation or something. I might pick up a book as like a travel souvenir, essentially. But in those cases, I usually try to look for a book that takes place in the place that we're visiting. But in general, I don't purchase a ton of books unless it's ones that aren't available through Libby. I will say I do have an Audible subscription for audiobooks, which those do count as book purchases, but since I do listen to audiobooks so frequently at work or while I'm doing chores, that seemed like a reasonable expense for me to have in my life. I am a librarian, so I don't feel too bad about the number of books that I currently purchase, whether digitally or physically. Actually, a lot of the books that I do pick up that are physical copies, I get from little libraries or used bookstores, or like sometimes the library sales that are in public libraries. But I had noticed that we seem to be trending towards a very expensive reading lifestyle, for lack of a better word. And hey, if that's what people choose to spend their money on, good for them. But I also don't want to be a part of anything that pressures people into thinking that that is the correct way to read, because reading at the end of the day is for your enjoyment. It shouldn't be something that you feel pressured to do or financially pressured or financially stressed by. Like, I am lucky to have a beautiful bookshelf behind me. That's actually part of why I switched locations today, was to be able to show this off. I realized it was kind of silly that I filmed my book podcasts in my craft room and not in front of my library shelf in my living room. But I do kind of want to stay mindful going into 2026 of how many books I'm bringing into my personal collection. But again, a lot of them I get from little free libraries, and then if it's not something I feel like I need to keep, they go right back out into the little free library exchange, I guess is the way to say that. But with all that being said, I do still have some goals that make sense for me as a reader. I do read fairly fast. I don't tend to read every single day, but I can read like 200 pages an hour if I like put my mind to it. I've also been way more interested in audiobooks lately, so I've been trying to read more that way. Not so much as a like, I have to read this many books in this amount of time. It's more of a, I'm trying again to avoid social media before going to bed. I'm always in a cycle of trying to do that. So I have set some reading goals that make sense for me and how much I tend to read, but I don't in any way want to be part of the pressure that people are feeling of, you're not really a reader if you don't read 100 books or more a year. No, that's silly. I'm someone with multiple hobbies. I'm someone with a full-time job. I'm someone with a life outside of my hobbies. So this is just what makes sense for me because of the reading speed and the career that I have, but no pressure on anybody else for not reading the same way that I do. I did bring up my bullet journal to talk about goals. This is my bullet journal for the year. I get these from Michael's. I like that they have this one in a whole bunch of different colors. I hadn't done a red one yet, so I wanted to have a red one in my collection. And I put this cute little sticker on the front. I will not be doing bullet journal videos this year, also as a note, just because they didn't get a lot of views and I wanted to do some simpler designs this year anyway, so I just didn't feel like it was something I needed to film. But I do want to show you my reading tracker in my bullet journal so that you can see how I'm keeping track. Last year I found it really helpful to give myself a couple of categories as goals for what I wanted to read. I didn't quite make my nonfiction goal. I was trying to do 12 Catholic books, 12 audiobooks, and 12 nonfiction books. I only got to 10 nonfiction books, which is fine. I just learned that that goal was maybe a little too high for me. So instead, this time I picked 6 categories that I'm interested in reading more books in and only put 5 for each category. So I still want Catholic books as one of my categories, so I have 5 slots for that. I have 5 slots for nonfiction, 5 for fantasy and sci-fi, 5 for romance and contemporary fiction, 5 for thriller and mystery, and 5 for historical books or classics. And I left these categories pretty loose. That's why some of them are even combined. But it's more that I want to continue being someone who reads a variety of books and isn't a one specific genre reader. I like having a variety. I think that makes me more well-rounded as a person and more well-rounded as a librarian who recommends books to other people. Even though we don't have an adult section in our school library where I work, I do still try to be fairly well-read in adult books so that I can recommend them to colleagues, because I do now have some people coming to me for book recommendations, which makes me really, really excited every time that happens. And then also at the bottom of the page, I listed my overall goal for the year as 75 books. I always put what I say is my on paper goal as lower than what I actually want it to be, because I want it to be attainable. So really I'd like to get to 100 again, but again, that's just me. And it works in my lifestyle and with my career, so do not feel pressured to do the same. I also took away my audiobook goal that I had last year. I don't have that as a category anymore, just because it wasn't something I needed. I read way more than 12 audiobooks last year. I think it was like 20 something of my 100 books were audiobooks. So I took away the format goal just to simplify things a little bit. But then I always put in the title, the author, and my rating in my bullet journal. Even though I keep track of this on an app, I do like having a hard paper copy as well. And sometimes I do look back to previous bullet journals and see what I was reading in specific years, or use my app to go back and see what I was reading at certain points in my life. But that's it for my reading goals for this year. I hope that you are entering 2026 excited about reading. If reading is not currently a part of your routine and you want it to be, I hope that you find a manageable way to do that. I personally like reading before bed when I have the mental energy for it. Otherwise, I like listening to an audiobook and playing a silly video game while listening to the audiobook. I also like audiobooks and knitting, and yeah, I think it's a great way to end the evening, but find a way that reading works in your schedule. Maybe it's your lunch break. Maybe it's a few minutes in the morning with your cup of coffee. It shouldn't feel overwhelming. It shouldn't feel like a burden to your schedule, and you should not feel like you have to read 100 books in a year if you don't want to read 100 books in a year. If you read one, you've already read more than a majority of the adult population, I believe is the correct. Maybe it was 10. If you read 10 books in a year, you read more than like 90% of the adult population or something like that. Anyway, I want you to enjoy reading in 2026. That's my goal for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw today, make sure that you hit the subscription button down below. I post mostly crafty videos, but once a month I do post my book podcast where I talk about what I've read for the month. If this is the first episode that you have found, welcome. And if it's not, thanks for coming back. If you want to follow me on other social media sites, that's in the description box. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.